welcome to the video on descriptive statistics. Let's look at some descriptive statistics that are performed even before we start doing any analysis to understand our KPIs. The very first few questions that you need to ask before even looking at your data is, how big is your data? How many different data sources are there? What is the format of each data source? Because many times this decides which combination of tools we need to use to process our data. If our data size is very small or medium, which is let's say few gigabytes, we can just load our data in Python and use pandas library to do EDA. If the data size is large, let's say more than 5 GB or so, our RAM might not be sufficient to load all the data in the memory. Hence, we cannot just use Python and pandas alone. We need to load our data in some database and use a combination of SQL and pandas operations to perform EDA. If our data is very large, we might have to choose some big data solutions to do some analysis on the entire dataset. Also, identify how good is your data. Are there any missing values? If so, what is the percentage of missing values? Because of the percentage of missing value is very high, think twice whether you need to do any analysis. The results might not be reliable in such cases. The next important step to do is to identify what are different data types you have in your data. This is very crucial to identify the right kind of techniques. Typical data types that you need to look for is numerical columns like sales, volumes, students' marks, TRP ratings, etc. The next one will be categorical columns like product names, city names, state names, departments, etc. Sometimes these columns are also called levels, groups, dimensions, etc. depending upon the tool you are using for EDA. The third type is the textual column. If you have a column which contains product or service reviews, product description, tweet messages, the content of blog post or web articles, these columns can be considered as a text column. If you don't have text columns, you can right away knock off text analytics from your list of analysis to do in EDA. The next data type is date column. If you have past data, very likely you will have data columns like purchase date, date of birth of customers, issues opened or closed dates. If you have date columns, keep in mind that you can do trending analysis to understand how things are in the past. The next data type is geographical column like country names, state names, city names, addresses, pin codes, etc. We can use these columns to plot various maps to understand how your KPI is influenced by different geographical regions. If you do not have such columns, you can right away knock off such analysis. Apart from these data types, you will also have other types of columns like primary and foreign keys, phone numbers, email IDs, web URLs, etc. These columns might be useful for data wrangling, but might not always be useful for data analysis. So we can club them under others or miscellaneous categories. Depending on your data, you decide whether to use these columns for analysis or not. Once you identify the data type of each column, the next thing to do is to summarize them individually to understand data at a very high level. First, we will see how to summarize a categorical column. In this sample data, we have information about when a customer installed a particular mobile application in their device. Along with the device name, we also have customer's name, age, and country to which they belong. In this data, the device column is of type categorical. Let's see how we can summarize such a categorical column. The first summary point is to note how many rows are there. These will give us an idea about the total number of downloads for that application. Next, identify how many unique categories are there in this column. This gives us an idea about how many different types of devices customers are downloading their applications on. Among the different categories, Identify which category is most repeating along with what is the percentage of this most repeating category. This gives us an idea about the important category. For example, it could be that most widely used device to download is Apple and it accounts for 40% of the downloads. Let's look at how we can summarize numerical column. In this dataset, we have age column which can be considered as both numeric and categorical. If you consider this as a numerical column, the first few information that we might ask is what is my customer's minimum and maximum age. These two together is called range. Next useful summary is to get the average age of customers, which is also called as sample mean. Apart from these three, a few other important summary points are as follows. Identify the age below which 25% of the customer lies. The summary is called as first quartile or Q1. In this example, 25% of the customer's age lies below 28. Likewise, you need to identify the age below which 50% of the customers lies. This summary point is called second quartile or Q2. This is also very commonly called a median. You might have learned in statistics that if mean and median values are almost the same in distribution, we can call that distribution as a normal distribution. Otherwise, it could be a skewed distribution. Finally, identify the age below which 75% of the customer lies. This summary point is called as a third quartile or Q3. These summary points are very important to understand how your numerical data is distributed. In the later part of this course, you will understand how we can visualize these summary points using box plots. We saw how to summarize numerical and categorical columns. Apart from these, if you have date columns, identify minimum date, max date, and frequency of the date. Whether you have only a few days of data or a few years of data. If you have text column, you can identify the average number of characters or words or lines per row. Using text analytics techniques, you can deep dive into these columns. But to summarize, these data points might be sufficient to know. If you have location column, at this stage, treat them as categorical columns itself and summarize them how you could summarize a categorical column. A quick recap of what you learned in this video on descriptive statistics. First, gather the metadata about your data sources. This gives an idea about volume of your data and which tool to use. For categorical columns, identify how many unique categories are there and which one is most frequently used category. Summarize numerical columns using those 6-point summary to understand the distribution at a high level. For date columns, identify the time period of the dataset along with its frequency. Get to know whether we have daily data or monthly or yearly data. For text columns, calculate average number of characters or words or lines per row. Finally, treat the geographic column as categorical columns and summarize them accordingly. Thank you for joining us in this video. See you in the next one.